everybody, welcome back to What a W. I am here today with none other than Heather, who is joining me here today to do a review for Spider-Man No Way Home. Hello, Heather. How are you doing today?
Hi everyone.
Well, so we both had the opportunity to check out Spider-Man No Way Home this past week. And so as of this recording, which will be Monday, we also got news that Spider-Man is officially the second highest box office record debut in cinema history, which I think just surpassed Avengers Infinity War, if I'm not mistaken. So we're now Infinity War is number 3, Spider-Man No Way Home is number 2, Endgame still number 1. And it's hard to believe there's 3 Marvel movies that are in the top 3 record-breaking films of all time. So it goes to show you that comic books still have an impact, which I'm really happy to get for us to get into a topic here, because I know that we all were excited about how this is all going to be handled now that Marvel had announced that, or at least Sony had announced that they're going to be moving on with their own trilogies. But then just recently, Marvel had announced that they're also going to be working on the new set of trilogies. So they're back working again with Sony, considering how the way the films had ended. So for anyone who has not seen the movie, we're getting into spoilers here, because at this point right now, for us to just kind of hold back with our thoughts on the film makes no sense. So we're just going to get right into it. So I thought a good way for us to get started with this here, because I actually want to know what your overall thoughts of how the character was handled in the MCU, considering how he was introduced in Civil War to where we are with it now. So I want to hear your overall thoughts about what we got from the character since he was introduced officially to the MCU.
So I love Tom Holland. He's just this little baby who always wanted to be Spider-Man, and you can really tell in his progression as the character that he's just this is the role he wanted to play, and he took it well. He had some great strong directive, and when we saw him originally in Civil War, he had the cute quips. He had everything that we wanted to see in a Spider-Man, and it led to him really taking on the responsibility with great power in this movie. And it was really, I don't know if it was so much progression in talent, because I feel like in reality he might have gone through a year of school throughout this entire series. But he I think as a character within the MCU, I think it was a cute and solid way to have the character progress from movie to movie.
Do you think out of all the Spider-Man portrayals you've got in cinema, was he the best for you so far from what we've gotten? In terms of like just Peter Parker and Spider-Man, or just you like him in some areas that probably Tobey Maguire did better or Andrew Garfield did better with the interpretation of the character?
Okay, so I'm going to be that chooser. I don't believe that you should have a favorite. Like you can have, I think that Andrew Garfield had the better quips, and I think he put him out better. I think Tobey Maguire was the one that helped bring comic book movies into a more modern day. I think that Tom Holland was the cute little younger Spider-Man that we've been looking for. I don't believe in a favorite. And I'm honestly kind of going to blame the fans for that. This movie, with the anticipation, no Spider-Man's going to be perfect, and no Spider-Man's going to be our own. We're all going to have our favorites, and I don't think we should pick, because we should enjoy each one individually. So, and I mean, then it all culminated into this. So I'm sorry to be the downer there, but I love them all. So I'm just going to say I love them all.
Such a diplomatic answer.
I'm a comic book person. I'm sorry.
No, that's actually a very fair answer. From my perspective, I actually thought so. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but we'll certainly get into it a little bit here. But I'm in the camp of that. I think Holland has done it the best. But after watching this movie, my perception of who did it better has changed a great deal. So obviously we'll get into that a little bit here. So all right, well, so you shared your thoughts about how Marvel had handled the character when they introduced him in the series. So for me, I've never read the comic books. I've read snippets of it growing up as a kid. I've only read literally, I mean, this is no joke, what came out in the Sunday papers. It was a 3-panel papers. That's all I've read. Once in a blue moon, I might have read a comic book, but I can't remember which ones they were, because they were just single. They might have been like something from like, I don't know, from like Rite Aid or something that someone had just pulled up, and then I just gave it to me and I read it. And then I was like, that sounds great. But then I went to something else afterwards. So my introduction to Spider-Man has solely come from television. And then I knew beforehand he was a comic book character, but never really read the comic books religiously by any means. But from what I have gathered from the cartoons and from what I have seen in the 1970s TV show, which even then as a kid I thought was kind of bad, um, I was very happy to hear that Marvel was able to use Spider-Man in the universe, because if there's anybody out there that really needed to be in that universe, and people can have their opinions about this, Spider-Man needed to be there, because Spider-Man was officially the face of Marvel for a long,
Mhm.
long time. So for him to be a part of that universe in the film universe, I thought was something that was very much needed, not only for Sony to have, because it definitely rejuvenated their interest for the character, but also at the same time to have a new breath of fresh air, if you will, in having a character so iconic as Spider-Man to be introduced into the MCEU, where we've gotten Captain America, all these, I wouldn't say B-level characters, but for the most part, people who don't familiar with them, they would be considered that way. But having these characters that were certainly making an impact, but bring Spider-Man to kind of bring it up to a whole nother level, I think really changed the landscape for Marvel in a great way, in my opinion. So my experience with Marvel, with Spider-Man and the MCEU has been nothing but positive. I think, in fact, because he's been in the MCEU, things have gotten better, in my opinion, as far as the overall story arcs are concerned. But so now that you have seen the movie, what did you feel? Were you emotional? Were you kind of like speechless? Like, what was your overall thoughts at from walking away from the film?
I don't know if you follow me on social media at all, you know that I'm not speechless ever. um, uh, so initial thoughts were it was a lot.
Yeah.
That was, and honestly, this is going to be the only negative thing I'm going to say. It was a lot for
Mm,
one film.
true.
So when I was sitting in the chair and before the first post-credit scene, or I guess the mid-credit scene,
Mm,
the only thing I could think of was that was a lot to digest. And so I need to sit here for a solid, 10 minutes during the credits and really like go through everything. And that's when I was just like, oh, there was that Easter egg there. There was that Easter egg there. It took time because there was just so much in this film.
do you think though that with rewatching the film again, because I'm assuming you've only seen the movie once since it
So
came out,
far,
right?
so
Okay.
far.
So do you think when you will go back and watch again upon reassessing what you've heard, what you've thought, what you saw in the film, do you think that perception might change a little bit for you? Because I feel like that's one of those things where if you go back and watch it again, because it was a lot to consume,
Mhm.
but going back and just really digest and really take your time with it, there might be something that may have not been as overwhelming as you may thought it was. Now that you had the time to kind of let things think through the way they are meant to think through for you. Do you feel like that might be the case here for you if you watch the
Absolutely. And,
movie?
and that's just the case for most Marvel films.
Yeah,
Like that's the great thing about it is you get to sit there, and I would even say the shows, because you never know what you miss in some of
true.
these series. So
Yeah.
at least a second watch are absolutely necessary. I'm going to give a small spoiler here, but like a good example would be Doc Ock with the arc reactor at the end.
Mhm.
It literally took me a solid 10 minutes to be like, oh, like I think I got home and I was like, he sold the arc reactor when he left. And I think I will notice more of that. I think all of us will notice more of stuff like that when we go back and sit down a second time. And this is definitely one of most of the MCU movies are definitely multiple watches. Absolutely, you'll never get bored. But small things, small things like that are definitely worth that second watch. And this is definitely, I absolutely agree with you. We need to watch this at least twice.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say I'm gonna piggyback on what you're saying there. I really do agree with you when it comes to um at least with this movie, that I don't think there's anything about this movie that I found rather boring when it comes to what was presented, because there's so much to consume, and going back to revisit it again, there's going to be something you can take away from the film that would hopefully surprise you again, or maybe have you look at it with a new set of lenses, if you will. When I walked away from this movie, my overall thoughts was that, quite honestly, I wouldn't say I was speechless, but I was more like, this is. I always felt like I felt the same way about Endgame when with that big epic battle sequence where you have everybody there. That was something that I've always wanted to see in a movie. From the comics I have read, I remember just thinking, watching like, I know this is not Marvel, but when you're looking at DC and you're looking at some of the other Marvel films that were kind of like some were very good, some were not very good. But I just remember thinking, imagine someone who took it seriously and just took it to a whole nother level and brought the best of the best and making it an epic film for everyone to enjoy. That's how you're meant to watch this movie, at least for me.
Mhm.
And when we were able to see that it be achieved in the level of Endgame, and then have Spider-Man more or less kind of do that in the same level, I would probably go as far as argue says that it's in the same peak as Endgame when it comes to the epicness towards the end. This is what I always felt like comic books should be, how they should be handled with respect, and respect to not just the current timeline of the stories that we're seeing, but also pay respects and homage to the stuff that's come beforehand as well too,
Mhm.
for everyone to take notice of, for the ones that, for the audience that watch the films that have no idea what's going on other than what's been happening in front of them, but for someone to come back out of the theater and say, wasn't it amazing to see this, and this? And what was that? What did that mean? That's where the education comes in. So now you're opening up a floodgates of like knowledge for people who are not aware of it, and then be presented to that set of knowledge of like how Marvel and the people who are behind the scenes were making these movies have paid respect to those that have come before, to hopefully, in my mind, educate those who are not aware of it at all, with those who are there to talk about those things and make commentary on. So that's what I picked up from this movie, as well as I did from Endgame, but more so in this film for some reason. But I always feel like comic book movies were like the films that were meant to be made by kids who loved watching fantasy, and presented to those who don't care for it, and then realize you guys do care. It just was never made as cool as it should have been. That's how I look at it with this movie. But I'm kind of going off on a tangent with commentary here,
Yeah.
but I think that's how I perceived it when I walked with this movie. Like, this is what it should have been from the very beginning. If you get the right people involved, you can create some great content here. So that's how I looked at it for myself. But for you though, I mean, what was your perspective on that in that regard?
So that does bring up a good point. When it comes to, let's just taking a step back in our conversation, there were so many people who were so excited to see this team,
Yeah,
this team, because it's what it was. You
yeah,
can either look at it from the three spiders, or you could look at it from MJ, Ned, and Peter. But you had this team that people were looking forward to so much that you definitely missed something over those claps. You definitely
yeah,
missed something. But when it comes to that is a great, it is a great point. It is a great way. There are so many people who, I am never going to say The Amazing Spider-Man was a great film. It was not, definitely not Amazing Spider-Man 2,
mhm,
but those movies still brought a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the story, and they're really fun films. And you won't understand. A lot of people just really harp on Andrew Garfield. You either love him or you absolutely hate him as Peter Parker.
yeah,
I don't understand. He's a fun Peter.
yeah.
Like,
I like him
honestly,
too.
he put out the quips, so probably the best of all of them.
Right.
But this film really reinstated the fact that you need to go watch those films to see how he reacted to Gwen's death,
Yeah,
for you to truly understand what catching MJ did, like
yeah.
why that was so important, and why that was such a terrible cry scene.
So let's get into the plot real quick. So for everyone that I think the whole world knows now, basically the film picks up after Far From Home, and now the whole world knows who Spider-Man is because of Mysterio, and then obviously J. Jonah Jameson kind of just revealed that to everybody, who now is trying to find a way to right the wrongs, and also help to find a way to get everyone to forget who he is, for reasons that we'll get into in the film. But with the review, I'm going to say, so with having Doctor Strange come into the mix and help with that, which was an obvious thing that they were doing so, because if those who are aware that Doctor Strange has a new movie coming out next year in the, what's it called, the Multiverse of Madness, is that what it's called, the new Doctor Strange movie?
Yes.
Yeah,
The,
so that is going to be the introduction among things we were introduced before with what was it, WandaVision, and of course What If, which is a major reveal when we get into this. I'm sure we probably would be getting into it later on. There's, having Spider-Man be the catalyst for all that there, as far as the film versions are concerned. We have now we have Doctor Strange trying to create this spell to have everyone forget, but Peter Parker has all these stipulations. Well, I don't want my Aunt May to forget. I don't want MJ to forget. I don't want Ned to forget, or Happy, or whoever else. And then that kind of just screws everything up. And now we're having all the villains from the previous incarnations in the Spider-Man movies are now being brought into this world, which is we're left to wonder, are we going to get Peter Parker from the Raimi verses, and also from the Webb verses, being the two previous films that came out before this current Spider-Man? And we do. So that's the spoiler right there. When it came to the villains in this movie, those were the selling points, as far as like the introduction of, we're bringing other villains from other universes from the film verses into this current one. That was the selling point. And then everyone else was obviously wondering, are Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire into the film? Yes, they are. But again, I was like I said before, my biggest concerns are they going to be used effectively? And they were. But the villains, on the other hand, although they were the selling point, I felt like to some extent they were kind of the biggest waste, with the exception of Doc Ock and Green Goblin, who were used brilliantly in this movie. But everyone else, on the other hand, weren't used very well. So much so to the point where I felt like Electro, his whole demeanor had changed completely from what we got from Amazing Spider-Man 2 to where he is now, where, in my opinion, it's pretty much just Jamie Foxx being Jamie Foxx with Electro costuming, if you will. I don't know if you felt that way about him.
I like that they gave. I was not a big fan of his version of Max.
Yeah,
and I really shouldn't say his version, because so much of that is directing. So much of that is directing, and they wanted him to be that version.
Yeah.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree. That was just Jamie Foxx being Electro.
Yeah.
Like, that's just who he was.
He was good, but
he was good. But the thing
Fox.
is that I actually liked this version, and him making those snide comments about how he liked this version of himself. I think that
right.
really kind of, it kind of broke the fourth wall. Exactly. But it's just one of those where it seemed weird, but I liked it. So.
But what did you think of the usage of and we'll get to Green Goblin and Doc Ock though, but as far as like the Lizard and Sandman's concerned, what's your opinion on the way they use those two characters?
Sandman was just a means to an end to get Electro, and I just think that was a waste. Especially since he's technically the way that his story was written was as an anti-villain, and so it's kind of a waste.
Yeah.
Especially when he literally does two things at Liberty, and then he becomes human again in the Crown, and that's the end of the conversation. Lizard, though, I will say that I liked that he was kind of the introduction to. I like that he was the one that came in. That's how we figured out they were in a jail, like they were kind of in the jail situation.
Yeah.
Because that was a good jump scare. I don't know about you. I jump at everything. So I definitely was like 2 feet in the air at that point. But the one reason that I was okay with it is because he is technically the vindication for Garfield's Parker, and that's how MJ falls. We needed that catalyst to get MJ to that point, and that's what, at least Lizard was used as that point. He had an end game. He had a goal.
So he was a tool, basically.
Yeah. Well, they at least used the tool.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see, look, I understand that, this is what, 2.5 hours and some change. So there's only so much you can do to give the time of the day to certain characters. But, so now I guess this will be a good segue for us to talk about the two main villains in this movie, being Doc Ock and, of course, Green Goblin, who were used brilliantly in this movie. One thing I want to point out here about Doc Ock is that Alfred Molina seems like he fitted right back into this role so effortlessly, because he was so good in this movie. I loved him in this part, but even better, I thought that Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin was even better than what we got from the previous incarnations we got in the Raimi trilogies, or Raimi, I meant to say, where he became, how I remember Green Goblin, as the Green Goblin incarnation that we all really wanted, how I perceived it to be, where he really was the true arch nemesis of Spider-Man that we have all been accustomed with, where I think a lot of people don't realize that Green Goblin is essentially the Joker to Spider-Man. Like, he is the guy, as far as, like, if I can remember correctly. Is that fair to say? Or, because that's how I remembered him as.
I wouldn't necessarily put it that way, but I would say that he's definitely in the top 3 of his rogues gallery. There's a top 3 point.
Was he number 1, 2, 3?
I would probably put him at number 3, but when it comes to, I also pardon my relation, I hate the Joker Batman dynamic context in terms of everyone else. One of the great things about Spider-Man's rogues gallery unlike what so much of DC has, is he has a very even across the board rogues gallery with very different points of very like of really great villains that bring out so much more from him. And Green Goblin, as you were saying, is just one of those characters, just one of those villains that brings out something truly special in Peter. And William Dafoe, we finally got to see that with this version of him.
Okay, well, so that's where my lack of knowledge of the comics that you can see right here, where I just did not know. I assumed it was that way because that's how I remember from the TV show. But anyway, so yeah, okay, you bring up a good point there. But Willem Dafoe is essentially the, I wouldn't say the start of the film, but he's definitely the surprising. He is the secret ingredient, in my opinion, that really kind of helped put the driving force in the story. Where again, we're going to get into spoilers here. He's the one that essentially caused the death of Aunt May, which is one of the biggest, really the biggest emotional impacts that I've gotten from this movie, where you really get to see the shift of the tone the tone of the film shifted from being kind of lighthearted, but a little more darker as far as like the emotional beats are concerned, which honestly, I did not expect at all from this movie. I really did not expect it to be as emotional as we've gotten with this film. I can't, and I'll be upfront. I didn't come to crying, but I came really close to doing so with how, everything was handled here. So, when you see what the set of events that occur with Peter Parker working alongside with Green, well, in this case, what's Green Goblin's name again? His human name, what's his name again?
Norman Osborn.
Norman Osborn, yeah. See,
I was like, wait, Norman Osborn, okay.
Yeah, Norman Osborn. Yeah, so I think that when we get to see, Norman, become normal again, or becoming less evil in this case, you really get to see that dichotomy of the character where that he's very capable of pulling off something very good, but with bad intentions behind them. And as good as Willem Dafoe is with his performance, you believe everything that he says because he is that genuine when he comes and say these things to, please help me. I'm trying to stop this evilness that's inside of me, and I want to get away from that. He gives his whole speech about that. But when we see little things along the way where he's starting to show his true colors along the way, I feel like that was the turning point for the overall story, I think, which is what that halfway point of the film, if I'm not mistaken, we'll really get to see that shift in tone change a little bit. So I think that what I think this movie does brilliantly is that it does a lot of lightheartedness, which it does effectively well. But when it comes to the tone shift and making it a lot more dark and much more really emotional film, it does it brilliantly, in my opinion. In my opinion, I think way better than what Endgame had done. That's just how I look at it. I don't know if you felt the same way too.
Well, one thing that really made it clear, that was made very clear in that was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Like they came in and they made it point blank. This was the beginning of the worst. And so like when they killed Aunt May, you could feel that, oh shit, things are about to go down.
Yeah.
Because this is I did get a little emotional too, almost to the point of crying. I'm about the same. Because it was kind of a shoddy death. Come on, Marissa Tomei, you can do better than that. But I understand what they did. It was kind of the false sense of security, and they broke it. But they needed to, which is the worst part, is they needed for her to die. No, we'll get to the end, but we kind of needed her to die for the end to be.
Do you think that was necessary though to do that?
I do.
Okay.
I mean, we can talk more about that at the end when we're actually talking about what happens. But I do think that it was unfortunately something that needed to happen, and it was an important point because he does not seem to have an Uncle Ben in this universe. Which is very strange. But
I thought so too, yeah.
I just thought he was already dead. I had a mass assumption that Ben was already dead.
Well, they did bring awareness of him in, I think, Far From Home when he brought the suitcase out, wasn't there? Was there something about Uncle Ben listed on something about Ben's name on one of the things that he had at home? That's how I remembered it from Far From Home.
It could very have been, and I just didn't notice. I mean, I'm not going to. But he could also Ben could have been his grandfather. Could have been. It seems like May, the Marissa Tomei version of May, is one of the versions that did not get married, or if she did, it was
okay. So there was a version in the comic books where she was not married at all.
Yeah, so there are versions.
Oh, okay.
May
I didn't know
she
that.
is not married.
Okay.
Okay. So And it could be, which once
Okay.
the only weird thing about it is it's 616, and 616 May is definitely married. But she needed
Okay.
to teach him that important lesson: with great power comes great responsibility. And that is what rounded out the connection between the spiders. So we needed that to happen, not only for what happens at the end, but just so that he can connect with his counterparts just a few minutes later. So
Interesting. Okay. So we get that shift in shift in tone with the story where it becomes a very, very, I wouldn't say depressing moment in the film, but a very sad and, so I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this. So with Aunt May's death here, essentially, I kind of picked up on what the same thing that, so basically there was never any Uncle Ben in the film. And if there was, it might have been some sort of like, that's his father's name or whatever the case may be. I kind of picked up on that, but I wasn't too sure. But now that you explained it, I think it makes more sense. So with this particular version of Aunt May being more or less the Uncle Ben in this current universe here, that impact right there where you get to see, so basically Marvel did kind of like reverse engineering with Sony, where they, instead of having Uncle Ben being the catalyst to change his life and becoming Spider-Man kind of discovered his powers, got his powers through that spider that bit him. And then with Tony Stark's change, helped provide a suit for him that pretty much did everything for him. And now things are starting to work backwards, where he started to use his spider senses a little bit more, which is very prevalent in this movie, which is one of the things that I loved about the film, especially the way that he made that how his spider sense worked in this movie, which seemed very heavy hitting in my opinion.
that Doctor Strange moment where it's
Yeah.
his arm and you see his spider tingles. That was
Yeah. I did
beautiful.
notice that too. So I'm curious about like your thoughts on as far as how the movie would handle that, making Aunt May, like, I mean, you kind of touched upon it before, but the fact that they're kind of reverse engineering the whole storyline that we've all been accustomed with from those who've read the comics, and I'm sure there's different variations of how that came to be. But as far as the films are concerned, they kept that pretty consistent with the original origins of Peter Parker. Did you get a sense of that might be heading to that direction, or we're going to be seeing that Peter Parker that works alone and slowly will eventually possibly come back into working with the Avengers, with considering what's going to be happening down the line here?
Well, we can definitely talk about speculation in a little bit, because I
Right.
have a lot to say about what could happen with
Yeah.
the Avengers. But when it came to his origin within Marvel, one thing that Marvel has done amazingly well, and a very important lesson, Warner Brothers, very important. You don't need to retell the same story. And Marvel listened to their fans when they're like, we've seen it, we've been there, we've done that. Just give us Spider-Man. And so what they did is yes, he had, instead of having Uncle Ben, he had Tony Stark. He had that parental figure to help develop him. But in this universe, he already had a sense. He's just one of those kids that has a natural sense of justice. So he wasn't out like Toby's Peter, getting into fistfights to make money, and then that kills Ben. This Peter has been the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He was just doing it in the cheap, and that's it. And so now what we've seen that he's going, okay, with this film, my actions have consequences. And if I'm not careful, people can get hurt. And so we did need other characters to come into play. I wouldn't really say they've reversed it. I would say that they've just changed the momentum and given him a brand new origin, which is, I mean, it's not brand new, it's in the comics. Sorry, guys. This is a version of the comics. But I like that eye roll.
No, I'm not. I don't, because I hope, well, I hope it didn't come off the wrong way, because I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I'm thinking to myself, I should have looked into that, because there's so many different incarnations of, as far as like how the origin stories, not just with Spider-Man, with virtually every comic book character. This is not uncommon to come across that here, but for what I've been accustomed with when it comes to Spider-Man, it's always been Uncle Ben then after Uncle Ben, he becomes Spider-Man. And then then you have these love interests with Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane Watson, so on and so forth. That has always been consistent with the films. This was the first time where I've noticed it wasn't like that. And another thing too that I forgot to highlight here is that MJ in this movie is an official Watson. She actually is a Watson in this movie, which
Watson.
I didn't know, which is I just don't like to use that name. And again, this is one of the situations where she's MJ, but the MJ that we're all accustomed with is a white person in this film. That's not the case. And MJ means something else entirely different. And then we find out she's a Watson. So she is an official MJ Watson in the movie, but just not the one that we've all been accustomed with, at least as far as film goers are concerned, in respects to Spider-Man here. So they've made a lot of changes with this movie that pays tributes, but still takes his own identity, if you will, when it comes to the introduction of the story, which I never had a problem with, but I just was curious as far as the direction of the story they're going to be going with, because that's what, if there's one thing that I wouldn't say I had a problem with Spider-Man, but was just that I wasn't really sure in how, what they were going to try to do with the overall story with Spider-Man. I just assumed that it was just going to be the traditional stuff. But again, I'm repeating myself, but I'm curious though with how with the turn of events that we have in this movie. Are you, well, let me ask you this here. Were you at all a little concerned with how these events that we were talking about here was going to change the overall story for the character as far as his arc is concerned? Did you have any concerns about that at all? Or were you confident with what you saw that, okay, I know these beats, I know what they're going to be doing this here, therefore I like the direction they're going to be going with this, with the story of Peter Parker in this film?
I will say that I was concerned if Sony didn't fight. And that was a big concern back before. If Sony didn't fight and we didn't have the options we had for this film, we were going nowhere. And that was one of the comments that you heard at the end of Homecoming. Was not Homecoming, Far From Home.
Okay.
Was, where are they going to go? Because they're kind of at a stagnant place and Tony is gone.
Yeah.
If Sony didn't come in and they were like, no, we want him, we're going to fight for him, we're going to do this, I think that I felt a lot more confident going into this movie, knowing that Sony's like, I want my foot in the door. I want to be an active part of this.
You talking about Marvel or Sony? Because Sony owns
Sony.
Because Sony owns Spider-Man for the films.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to look confused with what you're getting with this here.
So you were asking if I was concerned about how this movie was going to progress, right?
Right.
So the only concern I had was back before Sony started fighting for Peter. I was concerned back in the day.
Okay, I got you.
Whereas the moment we found out that Sony was like, we want to be an active part of this, we want to talk about the Spider-Verse, we see how our animated film did.
Gotcha.
All of a sudden, most of those concerns that I had about where Peter was going to go were gone. They vanished.
Gotcha.
So I went into this film very confident, even if we hadn't seen the trailer and even if we didn't know there was going to be a whole bunch of villains from other universes, even if it was just the versions, those villains in the 616 versions, I went in much more confident because they had those characters and they could do more with Peter that way.
Interesting. Okay, I see your point now. I understand better. Okay, so now let's move on here to the next part of the film, which is that so Aunt May dies. Peter Parker is in a really depressing mode right now. And then we get Ned, which we didn't talk about here, but he has the ability now with what's that thing that Doctor Strange has, a little thing that he does is to create the rings, the portals. Somehow Ned, and this is the part, if there's one thing I had a problem with the movie, and I'm nothing against Ned as a character, but just the fact that he's been able to do this kind of out of the blue seemed a little unfitting for me, at least for me personally. But I mean, if I go back and watch it again, maybe my perception will change a little bit. But he has the ability now, once he steals Doctor Strange's thing, he's able to open up portals now. And that's when we get introduced to the very first Spider-Man from Amazing Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield, where he pretty much says, I was doing this and now I'm in this universe. And he's kind of aware of the whole multiverse, which he heard as a theory, which was very, very humorous in my opinion. And then he brings over Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, who has aged very well. I have to say, when I first saw him, I was like, oh, he's gonna look a little too old. And then when I saw him, I was like, oh wow, he's actually looks really good for being in his late 40s now. So kudos to that guy. But I knew for a while that he was going to be, both those guys were going to be in the movie. It was one of those worst kept secrets out there because Andrew Garfield famously had more than one interviews where he said, I am not going to be in the movie. No matter what I say, no one's going to believe me. Andrew Garfield's a very good actor, but when it comes to interviews, he's one of the worst actors out there to try to convince people that he's not in the film. And then there's that leaked footage that came out where it's clearly from a set of No Way Home, where you can, if you read the lips of what he's trying to say, is that there's a line about how if Tobey Maguire's character um, ever had any issues about shooting out webs, if he stopped doing that at one point, and there's a whole thing about that, which I thought was hilarious. So
We want to know. Everyone wants to know.
everyone wants to
the
know,
only place.
right? So
Great.
yeah,
That was actually really good.
that was actually really funny too. So there's, we all, at least I knew, and I'm sure you knew as well too, that this was going to be happening. It was really about how are they going to introduce the characters, which I thought was done brilliantly, in my opinion.
Mhm.
The only thing though, and I'm curious to hear your opinion about this here, it seems like the two Peter Parkers somehow in their lives, at least in their universe, they've already lived as far as the events that occur in the previous two movies, or in their versions of the film, they've already lived past that point.
Mhm.
Gwen Casey had passed away, and he had already faced the Rhino in the mechanical form. And then Peter Parker and Sam Raimi's universe has already faced Sandman, Venom, and the New Goblin. And he's kind of hinted about his relationship with Mary J. Watson in his universe. Whereas the villains, on the other hand, they were on the verge of fighting Spider-Man, and then they were about to face their death, but then they ended up in this current universe. So it seems like we've got two different versions of those characters in those respective universes, where the villains were currently fighting the heroes towards the end of the films, whereas the heroes already surpassed that point. So I was a little confused about that. I think a lot of it may have to do with the fact that they've aged a certain way and they want to keep it consistent with how they look. That's kind of my perspective on that. So I was curious to hear your thoughts on how they were brought in and where they were at the stage of their life as far as the films are concerned.
So I'm going to say this, and I apologize. I'm going to say this canonically as a comic book reader.
Mm.
So you can't, and canon is such a fickle thing, but
Yeah.
you, sorry guys, it is. The problem is you can't have someone there if they're not. So I really enjoyed the fact that what they did is you got the characters that know who Spider-Man is at the very last moment of their lives.
Right.
Well, when it comes to the villains, it was the last moment. They're just about to die. Something awful is about to happen, but that's the last time they were alive. So that's the last time that they can canonically come to another universe. But it also has to be late enough where they know who Spider-Man is. It can't be it is, I mean, I believe it's Electro who makes the joke that he's like, some kid from Brooklyn. I was hoping you were black. Like, it took him until almost the finale of the film to know that Spider-Man was Peter Parker.
Right.
So they needed to come in at a point in which they could. Whereas the Peters are still alive, they're still living their life. One of them is in a miserable state. He can't get past the death of his girlfriend.
Right.
And the other one is now living a happy married life after he got married to the girl of his dreams. So it's what you have these two older men in two very different places, but who both have the knowledge and the will and the understanding that, oh shit, something's going to happen. Yeah. And you also have the same point with the villains. You have these incredibly brilliant, incredibly knowledgeable villains that can take apart the moment and be like, I'm not in the right place, but I'm not going to have a major freak out about it. So it might seem strange that they're coming from different points in the timeline, but canonically you can't have, if Green Goblin's dead and he's been dead for what, I guess it's about, I think they have it like 3 or 4 years between the first and the third Spider-Man. So like he's been dead for so many years. How could he come in at the same time? He can't. So I actually loved that. To go back to what you were saying before, though, I actually hated how they brought in the two spiders. I think that it was a cute little play-by-play of how they could really meet them, how they could meet Ned and MJ. But I would have actually liked it so much more if Peter was fighting someone, and it could have just been Green Goblin at that one moment, and you just see one of them come out an attack from one end and the other attack from another, and then they just really butt heads. Instead, you have this really just awkward moment at the beginning of their major fight where it's just like, wait, what's going on? And I kind of actually didn't like how they kind of poofed in like magic, other than the fact that you got the cute quips because of it. So,
well, I can see what you mean by that. I wouldn't say I agree with it, but I understand it. I didn't have a problem with it because now that you explain, because here's the thing, I liked how they were introduced, but I was just confused about how, that stage in their life and how they were brought in there. But what you said made more sense. So it seems like they were at a point in their lives where they were just trying to make the best of the situation. At least Peter Parker from Amazing Spider-Man, where you can see that he's trying to do the best he can, considering the hardship or the emotional hardship that he's been dealing with here, where he still has kind of that happy-go-lucky attitude about him to a degree. And then Peter Parker from the Raimi universe is still, well, in this case, he's much more mature. In that respect, I actually liked about the character. But as far as how they were introduced and kind of going at it with one another for like a second, I didn't mind it at all. In fact, I thought that was one of the most charming parts about the movie, in my opinion. But okay, so we've got our opinions on that. Now the overall introductions of the three Spider-Mans, we're finally meeting for the first time in the same room. That was something that I think a lot of people at some point in their lives, especially after Tom Holland had been cast as Spider-Man, where there might have been somewhere, in the thought process, we thought, wouldn't it be cool if all three of them could work together? As far as the films are concerned. I'm not sure if you've ever had that cross your mind at any point when you watch the movies, that was a possibility, especially when they were talking about the multiverse, if that was something that could come to fruition. And this movie brought that to life here. I'm not going to say that it crossed my mind, but it was one of those things when I heard about it, I was like, it'd be cool, but I don't think it'll ever happen. That was the extent of my thoughts on that. So I don't know for you, if you felt like this was something that you had thought of would ever happen. If it did, how would it happen in your mind? So, I mean, your opinions on that, seeing that for the first time on the screen.
I thought it was cute. I mean, I'm like everyone else. We all knew it was coming. I kind of half-heartedly, after everyone was just getting so mad at other fans for, once again, this goes back to the favoritism. I was just happy to see them. I didn't really care if they were there or not, but it was one of those where, don't bully other people because they don't like your Spider-Man. God damn it, just don't. But I was really excited. At the same time, I'm gonna pull the comic book retailer card. I knew a Spider-Verse was coming. I knew it.
You think? Oh, really? You felt like that was gonna be the case here?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think that? Did you feel that way because of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse? That was like the catalyst for that, to introduce that eventually, or you just felt like it was gonna be happening one day?
Oh no, we all knew. We all knew it was coming. Because and we weren't even thinking of it in the terms of it was going to be once Sony officially pulled back and they said we want the character back, that's when everybody, I'm gonna say, not just retailers, just everyone's like, oh, they're gonna do a Spider-Verse. They're gonna do a Spider-Verse, especially after Spider-Verse. Into the Spider-Verse is, I don't care what anybody thinks, what anybody says, Into the Spider-Verse is probably one of, if not the best comic book movies of all time.
Yeah, I agree too.
And it's one of those where after that happened, I think most people were just like, okay, they're going to do this. They have to do this now.
Right.
But Spider-Verse, the comic series, actually came out at the opportune moment for the MCU. So most retailers were like, this is doing way too good. Marvel would be dumb to not do a Spider-Verse, to not introduce other Spider-Men, even if it's not the originals. Like, the originals coming in is cool, but like they were going to do spiders from other universes at some point. Spider-Gwen, Ghost Spider, she's way too popular. Miles Morales, they needed to find a way to bring him in no matter what. So a Spider-Verse was inevitable. So I wish I could say I was surprised, but
you weren't. Okay, that's fair. All right. So now we get all three Spider-Mans together. They're interacting with one another. You're really seeing what the strengths are as far as the actors are concerned, what they brought to the character. And I'm going to be honest here. There was a period of time. Actually, I'll be more frank. After hearing what you said, and it's not the first time I've heard it before, but after watching this movie, I let go for a bit, but then I kind of went back to it where I thought Tom Holland is the best. But watching this film, I saw like what I loved about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and his interpretation of the character, Andrew Garfield, which I think a lot of people don't really appreciate as much because the films may not have been as good, but his acting, his portrayal of the character, I thought was phenomenal.
Mhm.
But this movie certainly showcases that. So if anyone stuck out for me as far as Spider-Man are concerned, Andrew Garfield did, in my opinion. I think he was the one that really showcased what he's truly capable of pulling off. Not as an actor, but really as a good superhero, in my opinion. So seeing all three of the characters interact with one another for the first time and seeing their distinct personalities, their experiences, all being brought within like, I don't know what minutes, the last 15, 20 minutes of the movie, you're getting to see the best of both worlds as far as what we've come to appreciate about these characters, love these characters for many people out here. Your thoughts on that? Did you feel like that was given justice for paying respects for the actors and what they've done in their respective films, and then seeing them work together to in this capacity for us as fans of those movies, and seeing what they're able to pull off working together with one another? I mean, your overall thoughts on that?
That was I wholeheartedly agree. I think it was very well done.
Mm.
And what was the best part of it, and we've mentioned it a few times,
Mm.
is that the way that they were making fun of each other
Yeah.
was truly Peter Parker in every way, shape, or form. But at the same time, they're inquisitive and they're supportive, and Toby
Dismissive too, I would say, especially when Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker was like, "I love you guys," and they're like, "All
I
right,
love
thanks,
you guys.
man."
I
Yeah,
love you.
that was hilarious.
You are a great person.
Yeah.
You like
You're amazing. And I was like, "Oh man, yeah."
it was
That got me. I'm not gonna lie, that got me. I didn't expect that to get to me like that because like here's the thing, Andrew Garfield got shit on for a lot of things, but I don't think it's a lot of things, but yeah, but his things, the things that worked so well for him turned out to be the people that the things that they shit on him for turned out to be the best things about him from what we saw in those movies that was brought on this film. And I think that the fact that we were able to kind of poke fun at him for that, and him kind of like taking the beating for it, if you will, from the other guys, where they're kind of dismissive about him, that was an obvious commentary about how people, as far as critics and the audience is concerned, felt about him. But he was the highlight, in my opinion, as far as the overall Peter Parkers are concerned. So let's talk about the big sequence at the end where we have the three Spider-Man who are working together to fight against the villains, being that Doc Ock has gathered the villains, if you will, which some people thought we might get like the Sinister Six, which I'm not too familiar with as far as how that all works together. But considering there's only 5 villains, I thought, well, who's gonna be the sixth one? Maybe Venom. That was just kind of a far-fetched idea, I thought. But I was wondering about how you felt the uses of the villain in the final battle sequence between the 3 Spider-Men. How did you feel about that as far as the overall I feel like epicness, if you will? So your take on that?
I would I'm like most people, I would have loved to see a good Sinister Six movie. We all do. We all wish that. I mean, no matter how much you hated Amazing Spider-Man 2,
Yeah.
it was, we all wanted it. We all wanted the Sinister Six to come in. But no, this was definitely not that. And I think they played that off very well, especially with them bringing in that final moment with, I know we haven't gotten there yet, but with that final moment with Doc Ock. It really shows how well a team can work versus how broken lack of communication, what breaks when you have a lack of communication.
Yeah.
You literally had supervillains on the same side that were not fighting together at all.
And they were kicking ass.
And I think they showed that very, very well. I really liked that.
So do you think though, with when you saw the lack of experience that the other 2 Spider-Men had when it comes to team effort, if you will, because they've always been working alone. That was the one thing about
Avengers
each
who?
of those movies. What was that?
Avengers who?
Oh yeah. Oh my God, that was so funny. He's like, "Are you in a band? Are you in a band?" Like that was so. Yeah, that was hilarious. Because I want to brag, guys, but I was with the Avengers. Oh, great. Well, who are they? Yeah. So anyways, so the fact that they highlight that these 2 Peter Parkers never worked together. They've never worked with other people. And then Peter Parker in the MCEU has worked with people. He's accustomed with teamwork, knowing tactics and whatever else, and then was able to think on the spot to, okay, you do this, you do that. Okay, great. Well, and then they knew exactly how to go along with those beats there. This is the thing I love about the movies, that they highlight the most obvious things that fans who are, who understand the lore, they know that, well, they've never worked together. So how are they going to work? They've never worked with other people. How are they going to work together as a team? They got to bring that up. And they do. So they don't fail to bring that to the attention of the audience to notice that these guys suck working together. And only one guy has worked with a group of people at an elite level. And he's going to be able to tell these guys how to go about it. He was essentially the ringleader of the whole thing, if you will. Mm-hmm. So, there's a lot of fun. They poke fun at themselves when it comes to that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of self-awareness. When I thought this movie did so brilliant when it comes to some of the flaws that these heroes have that they bring to the forefront. So as far as the battle scenes are concerned, with leading up to the actual fight sequence when they finally come to work together, pretty what's the word I want to use? What was that? Fluidly. Yes, thank you. How did you feel about the way that was handled for yourself? Because I'm curious to hear how you thought that when it came to the comparison to a lot of people that make that it's the end game, it's end game level type of battle. I didn't necessarily feel that way, but I think in terms of the emotional impact, it definitely had that for me, but not necessarily in the epicness as far as end game is concerned. But your thoughts on that?
So I mean, I agree. I'm also one of those people, and I apologize. I don't like to compare one film to another because there's just so many differences. Right. And if you were coming into any film and you're thinking that one is the same as the other, I'm going to give a really good example here. Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman are two incredibly different films with incredibly different superheroes. Stop comparing them because they're women. This is sorry, just getting that out there. But it's the same here. We need to stop looking at it as this is another team film like Endgame. Mm-hmm. This is a team of men who don't know each other, but at the same time they do. And you could really feel that from the conversation. It's in many team meetings, you're sitting here going, okay, this is what this means. This is what this means. I want you to do this. I want you to do this. But because it was Peter, and Peter, it was Peter saying, Peter, you do this, you do that, Peter. And then they're all like,
Peter 3, why am I Peter 3? Yeah.
I know. I was just like, wait, why is he Peter 3? Is it because he's the worst Peter?
Yeah. It's funny because technically he should be Peter 2, but I digress here. But yeah, you're bringing up a good point. So, but anything else you want to add on to that too, as far as what we were with what you were saying on that?
No, I think that's what gave it such a punch, was that you have these three very dynamically different people who could all do the same thing and can all understand each other almost subconsciously, but they have to get those few words out because it's Peter Parker.
True. Yeah, I agree with you on that. All right, so let's talk about how. So I forgot we forgot to leave out. I forgot to mention. I meant to say about the whole purpose of the battle, which is that the villains are gonna, once they go back to their universe, they're all gonna die. Mm-hmm. And Peter Parker, the current MCU Peter Parker, does not want them to go back to their death, and the villains all know that too. They're going to be heading back to meet their demise. And that's kind of the motivation factor for them to resist and wanted to go back. Hence the reason why we're getting this battle sequence at the end. So Peter Parker's change of heart of having the villains basically turn back into good people, if you will. And they have this whole thing about how they're going to come up with this whole mix of ingredients or whatever else to get them back to their respective good persons, if you will. Were you okay with that approach of the story? Because I'll be honest with you, it felt, on paper, it sounds kind of ridiculous. Mm-hmm. How it was executed, I thought it was okay. That is the only thing I'm mixed about how that was handled. But your perspective on how you thought that was handled?
I'm very much along your line of thinking. It was very strange. I know that's what May would have wanted. You wanted support. You want to be the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man who saves people. I understand that. I also understand, I mean, we all do at this point. We all understand comic book logic. Comic book logic is you do everything to destroy the plot to make it longer, draw it out. Yeah. But it's one of those where I won't deny I was kind of the same. I was kind of like, really?
Yeah.
That's what you're going to hang up about, is that these guys are going to die in a couple seconds. Technically, you making them a good guy isn't going to change that. They're still going to end up in the same spot.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess some people tomato, but I mean, it's one of those things where I mean, the movies do whatever they want when it comes
Yeah.
to how they're going to take on the character. So I really don't think that's going to have a major impact because, how long? I mean, can you get Willem Dafoe to come back to do another Spider-Man movie in this case? Now, probably not. But I mean, considering the uh, the awareness that this movie has and the anticipation for this film, I think that was an incentive for him to come back here. And same with Jamie Foxx, what's his name,
Mhm.
Alfred Molina, and some of the other actors as well too. They have that incentive to kind of give that respects to what they've done and give a proper closing to each one of those characters that I felt like some of the previous ones didn't really do so well. So I
Mhm.
thought that this was, I felt like they had that intention for them to give them a proper closure. So therefore, the actors have a reason to come back to have a good way to close out their story, if you will. And that's where I'm kind of mixed about it, was I think in that respect it worked, but just the execution of the overall reasoning and how they was handled, which I thought kind of like seemed kind of like cheap in my opinion. I don't know if it's the right word to use, but I feel like it could have been done a little bit better. But considering how everything ended, though, we do get the villains to go back to being good people, and then they will go back to the universe and live their lives, assuming that they've stay that way. How did you feel about that closure for the characters as far as the villains are concerned?
I mean, they're going to go back to their universe and be villains again.
You think so? Okay.
I mean, once again, that was one of those moments where I literally came home and I was looking at my husband, he's a huge Spider-Man fan,
Okay.
huge Spidey fan.
Is that his favorite superhero?
It is.
Okay.
It is. It's his favorite. I'm arachnophobic, so this is just great for me. But it's one of those where I literally was like about to get into bed, and I was like, Doc Ock still has the arc reactor. When he pulled it off of Electro, he never gave it up. So he literally went to his universe with the power of the sun in his hand.
Maybe he's going to use it for the better of the world. Who knows? I mean, he has.
Is he?
That's the beauty about this ambiguous ending for these villains here. You just never know. But I'm leaning. This is me being optimistic. I hope they stay that way. That's just how I look at it. Considering that we may never see these guys again. In my mind, they're living on making the world a better place. Norman Robbins still make billions of dollars. So the way I see this is going to be same. I'm hoping that would be the case with the villains here. But I mean, I don't know. I didn't really pay too much thought into that because I felt like the way it was handled was good. And I walked away satisfied. Wasn't fulfilled, but I was satisfied.
Okay.
So that's how I perceived it. But I mean, obviously, you kind of feel still kind of mixed about it with the overall.
No, I have a different opinion. That's all. I think that they're not done. I mean, William. Okay, just to go back, I didn't get to tag in with you because you said it so beautifully. But William Dafoe, he stole the damn movie.
Yeah, I think so. I agree.
But it's one of those where we might not see Green Goblin again because it might just be time for Green Goblin to retire.
Mhm.
But there is a very open place for characters like Doc Ock. Once again, it's like, and I keep bringing this up, but that arc reactor, he left with it. He might have plans for it. Sony might have plans for what Doc Ock is going to do with it. So, and I would never put the MCU or Sony or any of them away from what could happen because we don't know. And I think that one, getting a little bit ahead of myself, I think that the first credit scene is proof of that. We have no idea what'll happen because it can. And so I don't think that this is the end of some of those villains. I really don't.
You may have a good point there. Yeah. Who knows? That's the way I see it. So let's talk about the elephant in the room in Doctor Strange, where he's got to close the multiverse, if you will, and the fact that everyone that knows who Peter Parker is trying to break through, in this universe right now, and the only way he's able to really get everyone to stop is to officially erase everyone's memory, which Peter Parker finally agrees to, considering what had just happened and knowing full and well that his friends are never going to know who he is. And then that pretty much just restarts everything for him, where he's pretty much on his own. So that means the Avengers don't know who he is, although they're in this current universe. But Spider-Man's helped out, but they don't know who Spider-Man is. It's kind of an odd thing to take the direction of this character in that with pretty much getting a fresh start. kind of genius. I'm kind of mixed about it, but I'm mixed about it because I'm wondering how they're going to go about it moving forward here, which I know we'll get into in a little bit. But how they're going to be going about moving forward here is the part that excites me the most, because the opportunities as far as what they can do with the character is that they're bringing it right back to square one. So now you can reintroduce characters that were not necessarily introduced beforehand, where people have been accustomed to him knowing Harry Osborn, and now he can probably get introduced to Harry Osborn this time around. The post-credit scenes, which I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but we have Venom, who was in the universe for a short period of time, and then when he goes back to his respective universe, still a little bit of symbiote's been left behind, where now we're going to have a Venom in the current, I'm assuming, MCU verse. I think is going to be exciting too, because now we'll get two Venoms here, and the possibilities have two Venoms going out with one another. Think of those opportunities to be coming down the pipeline here. But and I know I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I mean, what's your overall thoughts about the direction of the story? The way the film has ended, with Peter Parker kind of pretty much starting from the ground to work his way back up again, to have everyone, not with everyone not knowing who he is now as Peter Parker. So your take on that?
So I'm also, to start out, I'm of the notion that not everyone doesn't know him, because I will sit on the Nick Fury knows fucking everything grave. Bleep me out if you need to. But I am, that man still knows who Spider-Man is. I don't care what you say. Nick Fury knows who he is. And he always will.
You bring up a good point. I think you're probably right.
If
there's anyone that may know who Peter Parker is, it's got to be Nick Fury. And that might
Fury.
be the one link that he has with everyone in the current MCU. So yeah, I think you bring a good point. Interesting.
So I do think that Nick Fury knows.
Okay.
But I also think that going back, I think this was why it was so important that May died. He literally has nothing that would hold him back from saying, nobody needs to remember who I am. I can go find my friends. I love my friends. They're very understanding. But if I lost May, I don't think I could say no. I don't think I could say nobody should remember me. May, but my only family member is gone. So go ahead and erase everyone. I'll go find a few people. So I like how this ended. I love the fact that they brought back the original, the very first blue and red spider suit.
So was I.
I loved that part. And I agree with the great thing about a redo is that you can literally start at the beginning. And we know that they're talking about doing a potential Spider-Verse within the universe. It also gives Peter the opportunity to feel like he can jump from universe to universe without there being any consequences of his current life, because nobody's going to be expecting him to come back home.
Interesting.
Which is
a good point.
Which is actually sadder than it should sound, but it's one of those where it actually
so depressing.
No one's going to miss him. He can totally vanish. It's fine.
If we lose one, we got another one in another universe here, so we're fine.
Just bring in Spider-Gwen, everyone. Nobody would even notice.
I'd be very interested to see that in a live action version too. Can you imagine bring that in?
By the way, one of my favorite comments to take a step back when it comes to other spiders was one of I mentioned earlier about how I love that Jamie Foxx made the comment about how he thought that Spider-Man was black.
Oh yeah.
That Electro said that, and it's like one of the comments that would actually really excited me is people were like, if Miles was to be introduced, who would be his Peter Parker to teach him how to be a Spider-Man? And almost unanimously it was like, it needs to be Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker, because he's gone through the strife, he's gone through the sadness, he's gone through everything. And Electro being the one to tell Peter that there needs to be a black Spider-Man just seemed like Marvel was like, we know exactly who's going to.
We're way ahead of you, JB. Don't you worry. We got you.
Don't worry. Yeah. I guess that would be Sony, but still, it's just like.
Oh yeah. You're right.
We know that there's.
Feels like Marvel owns them, though. Yeah. You probably should.
So it's. I think that this actually just, as you said, it really opens up brand new floodgates for Peter that aren't kind of diverged with what Tony Stark kind of left in his wake.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's actually a great thing.
All right. So, we've got that. And I kind of want to touch upon here real quickly about the trailer that we got at the very end, considering that this movie was essentially the lead up to the Multiverse of Madness, the new Doctor Strange film that's coming out next year, where it's now going to be taken to a whole nother level, which I'm wondering the the impact that that movie will have with the overall MCEU will have as far as like, you know, all the other characters are concerned. And one major tie-in, which I'm sure when you saw in the trailer, was with the What If series, which Kevin Feige had confirmed it is going to be, excuse me, it is going to be part of the current MCEU line. I'm wondering to what extent. We know now from the trailer, for those who have seen the Doctor Strange episode, that Doctor Strange had an evil version of him out there. You know, I'm not going to go into the details about that, but we see that evil version in the live action film in that trailer. We're not that holy shit. That out of everything that that blew me away as far as like shock value is concerned, it was that moment in the trailer, which I thought, okay, so it is now, you know, everything is out now. So we're really going to see the ramifications of what the What If universe has on the current MCEU, and what Doctor Strange's actions are going to be taken for that film are going to have an effect for the overall universe. I'm really curious to see how that's going to play itself out. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that as well too.
I don't know about your showing, but when the moment when Evil Doctor Strange came out was almost as loud as the clap when the Spider-Man's came. It was almost that loud. Yeah. That is going to be madness. Madness is going to bring in the Fantastic Four and X-Men. That's how we're going to get those characters.
You think so?
So I am incredibly excited.
Interesting.
I'm
actually interested hearing you say that how they're going to bring the Fantastic Four and also the X-Men in the current MCEU, which we all I'm sure you know as well too. John Watts, who directed the Spider-Man trilogy, for in this case for Sony, with Tom Holland, he was announced not too long ago that he's going to be directing the new Fantastic Four film, which is still a long ways to go. Oh, yeah. So considering with what he has done with the 3 films, which I think he did really, really well in my opinion. Some things I felt like could have been worked on better, but it seems like he's gotten better with each film, which I think, considering the amount of responsibility that Fantastic Four he's going to have with that film, with what he's been able to do with the last 3 movies, I think he's more than capable of showing what he's able to pull off here. So I'm curious to see what he's going to be doing with that. Okay, so overall thoughts. I know we shared our overall thoughts in the beginning, but after going over the details here, what we've loved and what we didn't like about the film, what we mixed about, your takeaway as far as how you felt about the film in reassessing here. How do you feel about it now, considering that we had the opportunity to kind of go over, well, we kind of went all over the place, but how we felt about the film, sharing our thoughts here.
It was amazing. It was a really, really good comic book movie, and it was exactly what we needed. Personal opinion.
Okay.
Exactly what we needed.
I'm in the same boat as well for you with what you just said there too. My overall thoughts is that I think this was like the event of a lifetime, where not only just for comic book fans, but for general movie going audiences as well, where they get to see something really special that is something we've all dreamed of seeing to this epic scale. And the fact that it happened in our lifetime here, we can literally talk about this down the line with, you know, children and who are never seen the original film when it was released, and having that introduced to them with the current whatever films are going to be going at that time now, and our perspective on that as well too, as comic book film lovers here. So I'm just curious to see how things are going to be changing moving forward, as the ante has been just going up and up and up, and I'm curious to see how that's going to be taken from there. But all right, yeah, so those are our thoughts on the film here. So let us know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and if you have seen the movie, what did you think? If you think it was good, if it's as good as all the other films that you guys think have come out beforehand, if you felt like the original Spider-Man films that were done by Sam Raimi were better than this one, I really would like to hear your thoughts. Even though Heather here has shared her opinion, which I do agree with you on, I meant to say, Heather, that it doesn't matter, you know, who the best one is. Everyone does have a special thing they brought to the role that make them unique in some ways or shape or form. But having these 3 guys together showcasing all their strength made us realize why we as fans love this particular moment in time in film history here, which I think was something that, will ever be repeated again? Probably not. But the fact that we were here to see that, I think, is really, really important for us to appreciate here. But yes, let us know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And also make sure you follow us on our social media accounts as well too. On Instagram, make sure you follow New Release Wednesdays on Facebook and Instagram, New Release Wednesday, I meant to say, and on Twitter at the NRW. And for you, Heather, where can they follow you on social media accounts?
You can follow me at Nerd is a Heather on Twitter and at Heather is a Nerd on TikTok and Instagram. You can also follow the hashtag New Release Wednesdays. I'm supposed to do new comic releases every week. So definitely check it out. We'll be talking about some Spider-Man on there. So definitely
Awesome.
keep that in.
All right, well, you guys are following on my social media accounts on Instagram, Rob_Medina0585, on Twitter, RobMedina0585, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina, and the show social media account that I have here on NRW, Yours Cool with Rob Medina, on Instagram, and on Twitter, Yours Cool WRM. Until next time, everybody, stay safe out there, and cheers.